It starts small. A child drops a glass on the floor. You hear the crash, you turn around, and before you say anything, they're already crying. Not because they're hurt, but because they know what comes next. Pause there for a second, because that moment right there is not innocence, it's prediction. And prediction is where dark psychology begins. Now, here's the uncomfortable part. Most people think manipulation is something you learn later in life. Teen years, adulthood, maybe from toxic relationships or corporate politics. But the truth is simpler and far more unsettling. Children don't learn manipulation, they discover it. By age 2, most kids have already figured out a basic equation: action to reaction. Cry louder, get attention faster. Smile at the right time, avoid punishment. Repeat what works, drop what doesn't. No one teaches them this system. They reverse engineer it, and they do it quickly. Because the human brain, especially a developing one, is not designed for truth. It's designed for outcomes. Now, imagine being in a world where you have no power, no money, no authority. The only tools you have are behavior, emotion, and timing. That's childhood. And in that environment, influence becomes survival. So what does that look like in real life? A child falls, looks around, and only cries when someone is watching. That's not fake emotion. That's calculated expression. Another child says, "I'm sorry," immediately after doing something wrong, not because they feel it deeply, but because they've learned that those two words reduce consequences. Again, not evil, efficient. Now, scale this up. Studies in developmental psychology suggest that by age 4, children can already understand that other people have different thoughts than their own. It's called theory of mind. But here's what matters more. Once you realize someone else has a mind, you can influence it. That's where things shift, because now behavior isn't just reactive, it becomes strategic. A child hides a broken toy and blames a sibling, not out of malice, out of risk management. Another child compliments a parent before asking for something. Timing, framing, reward anticipation. It's negotiation, and it works. Here's the mechanism most people miss. Children are constantly running micro-experiments, thousands of them every day. If I do this, what happens? If I say it this way, do I get a better result? If I wait, does the reaction change? Over time, patterns emerge, and once a pattern works consistently, it becomes behavior. Not because it's right, because it's effective. Now, let's introduce the uncomfortable math. Let's say a child tries 3 different reactions to the same situation: crying, staying silent, laughing it off. If crying gets attention 80% of the time, guess which one gets repeated? This is reinforcement, not morality. And reinforcement doesn't care about honesty, it only cares about results. This is why some kids become dramatic, others become quiet manipulators, and some become people pleasers. Different strategies, same system. Now, here's where it gets more complex. Adults respond emotionally to children, not logically. A child crying triggers urgency. A child smiling triggers warmth. A child staying silent can trigger concern or sometimes neglect. And kids notice this very early, so they start adjusting, not consciously like a chess player, but instinctively like a system optimizing itself. And here's the irony. The more emotionally reactive the adult, the faster the child learns to control the interaction, because predictable reactions are easy to influence. If every time a child raises their voice, the parent gives in, the child doesn't become spoiled, they become trained in leverage. Now, zoom out. This isn't about bad kids, this is about human behavior in its rawest form, before social rules fully settle in, before long-term consequences are understood, before empathy is fully developed. It's strategy without filters, and sometimes it's disturbingly effective. Take lying, for example. Most parents panic when their child lies for the first time, but here's the twist. Lying actually requires cognitive development. You need to hold two realities at once, the truth and the alternative version you're presenting. That's not a failure of intelligence, that's a sign of it. The question is not, why did they lie? The real question is, did it work? Because if it did, it gets stored and reused. Now, contrast this with what we tell ourselves. We like to believe children are purely honest, purely innocent, purely transparent. But that's not entirely true. They're learning systems, and learning systems optimize for success, not virtue. Virtue is taught later, sometimes much later, and sometimes not at all. Here's where things get risky. If a child grows up in an environment where manipulation consistently produces better outcomes than honesty, that pattern doesn't disappear. It evolves. The tactics become more sophisticated, the stakes get higher, but the core equation stays the same: action to reaction to reward. And this is where many adults get blindsided, because they're not dealing with a difficult child, they're dealing with a highly trained behavioral strategist who started learning years ago, quietly. Now, let's add one more layer: attention. Attention is the most valuable currency in childhood, and kids will do almost anything to control it. Positive behavior gets attention. Negative behavior also gets attention. Silence often gets ignored. So what happens? Some children learn to be charming. Others learn to be disruptive, because both guarantee visibility, and invisibility feels like loss. This is why sometimes the worst behavior is actually the most logical move within the system the child is experiencing. It's not random, it's optimized. Now, here's the part most people don't want to admit. Adults use the same mechanisms, just with better language, better timing, and more subtlety. Workplace politics, social dynamics, relationships. The difference is not the system, it's the disguise. So when you look at a child manipulating a situation, you're not seeing something foreign, you're seeing the early version of something very familiar, stripped of polish, stripped of restraint, but fundamentally the same. And that raises a question most people avoid. If these patterns start this early, and if they're reinforced over years, at what point do they stop being child behavior and start becoming identity? Or maybe the better question is, do they ever really stop at all?